Mr. Warlow had seen many strange things in his years of space travel, but nothing had ever prepared him for this. As he sat in the control room of his small ship, a message appeared on his screen. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was there, an invitation. The message read, "Come find me, Captain Warlow. I've been waiting for you." At first, he thought it was a prank. No one had heard of the black ship in years. It had vanished into deep space centuries ago. People called it a ghost ship, haunted by the souls of its long-lost crew. Some said it was cursed. Others believed it held great treasures. But no one had dared to search for it. Still, the message felt real. It wasn't just a random signal. It had a certain pull to it, as if the ship itself was calling to him. Without a second thought, Mr. Warlow set a course for the coordinates. His ship, the Vanguard, hummed softly as it moved through the darkness of space. The stars blinked in the distance, but the space ahead of him felt strangely empty, like it was hiding something. As hours passed, he began to feel uneasy. The message played over and over in his mind. "Come find me." But why him? Why now? Then he saw it. At first, it was just a shadow against the stars. But as he approached, the black ship became clearer. It was massive, its dark hull looming like a ghost in the void. The ship had no lights, no signals, just an eerie silence. It was as if time had stopped around it. Warlow hesitated. He had heard the stories how the black ship would take anyone who stepped aboard, never to return. But curiosity won out. He docked his ship near the black ship's airlock and stepped out into the unknown. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the ship was cold, colder than space itself. The walls were covered in dust, and the floor creaked beneath his boots. There was a smell of old metal and something else, something faint, like the faintest hint of decay. He took a deep breath and moved forward, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The ship was enormous, its hulls twisting in every direction. Every corner seemed darker than the last. But there was something more than just the cold silence. Something watching him. He continued through the hallways, his pulse quickening with each step. The air was thick with the feeling of something or someone nearby. As he passed a set of doors, a strange sound echoed from within, a whisper, followed by a soft laugh that sent chills down his spine. He froze. His heart raced. That laugh, it sounded like a person, but there was no one around. "Is anyone there?" Mr. Warlow called out. His voice seemed small, swallowed by the vast emptiness. No answer. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. He kept moving. The deeper he went into the ship, the more disorienting everything became. Hallways twisted in impossible ways, rooms appeared and disappeared, and sometimes he swore he saw shadows moving just out of the corner of his eye. But when he turned to look, there was nothing. After what felt like hours, he finally reached the central chamber. It was a massive room, stretching far beyond what his eyes could see. The air was thick, heavy with something ancient. And in the center of the room, standing still as if waiting for him, was a figure, a person, dressed in dark clothing. Their face was obscured by a hood, but the figure didn't move, didn't speak. "Who are you?" Mr. Warlow asked, his voice now trembling. The figure slowly turned to face him. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, empty and cold, like they had seen too much. The figure raised one hand and pointed toward a dark corner of the room. Mr. Warlow followed the gesture and saw something there, a small table on which lay a strange, glowing device. "Take it," the figure whispered. Warlow stepped forward. He didn't know why, but he couldn't resist. He reached for the device. The moment his fingers touched it, the ship shuddered. The walls around him groaned as if the ship was coming to life. The figure vanished, and in its place, the room started to twist and shift. The ship was alive, and it was angry. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hall. The lights flickered, then went out. Mr. Warlow's heart raced as he sprinted back toward the airlock. The ship groaned again, but this time, it felt like it was closing in on him. The walls shifted, narrowing, and the floor beneath him seemed to pull him deeper into the ship. He didn't know how long he ran. But as he reached the docking bay, the airlock doors started to close. He dove into his ship just in time, barely escaping the grasp of the black ship. His heart still pounding, he looked back at the massive, dark vessel. It drifted silently in space, as though nothing had happened. But Mr. Worlow knew better. The black ship had been waiting for him. And now it would follow him. He had accepted its invitation. But the real question was, had he escaped, or was he just the next soul it had claimed? Captain Mr. Worlow had heard the stories for years, the tales of a ship that disappeared without a trace. People called it the Black Ship, and it was said to be cursed. No one dared to go near it. The ship had vanished long ago, but its legend had never faded. Some said it was haunted by the souls of its lost crew, others claimed it had a mind of its own. But to Mr. Worlow, it was just a myth. Or so he thought, until one quiet evening in deep space. His ship, the Vanguard, was drifting along its usual route when a strange signal began to play on his communication system. At first, he thought it was interference. Space was full of strange noises, after all. But this signal was different. It was a repeating message, clear and distinct, like someone was calling to him. "Come to us, Captain. Come find us." The voice was faint, but it was unmistakable. Mr. Worlow's heart skipped a beat. He knew the stories. The Black Ship. It was real. Despite his fear, curiosity took over. He couldn't ignore the call. It was like something was pulling him, urging him to come closer. He followed the signal, setting a course for the unknown. His crew was nervous, but Mr. Worlow reassured them. "It's just an old ship, nothing to worry about." But deep down, even he wasn't sure. Hours passed and the Vanguard approached the coordinates. The stars ahead seemed to blink and shift, but there was nothing else. No planets, no ships, just darkness. Then, through the blackness, the black ship appeared. It was massive, its dark hull like a shadow against the stars. It didn't have any lights. It didn't even seem to move. It was as though it was frozen in time. Worlow couldn't take his eyes off it. He felt a strange chill running down his spine. The black ship was real, but something about it didn't feel right. The silence was too deep, too complete. The Vanguard slowly moved closer, and Mr. Worlow's hand hovered over the controls. He had a bad feeling. His crew could feel it too. "Captain, we shouldn't go closer," one of his officers, Elora said, her voice shaky. "We have to see it for ourselves," Mr. Worlow replied, though his voice didn't sound as sure as he wanted it to. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them. When they docked with the black ship, the door opened with a slow, creaking noise. The ship's airlock had been untouched for years, but it still worked perfectly. The crew stepped inside, and the air hit them like a wall of cold. It was freezing inside the black ship, as if the ship itself was alive, breathing in the coldness of space. The halls were dark, lit only by faint, flickering lights that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Everything was covered in dust, but the ship seemed to hum with an ancient energy. The silence felt unnatural, as if the very ship was holding its breath. As they moved deeper into the ship, they found strange things. Old rooms filled with empty chairs, machinery that hadn't been touched in centuries. But there was no sign of the crew. No bodies. No trace of life. Where did they all go? Alara whispered, her voice trembling. Then they heard it. A soft whisper, like a voice coming from the walls. It was too quiet to understand, but it was there. And it was getting louder. Worlow's heart pounded in his chest. The crew was unnerved, their eyes darting around. They were not alone. "We need to leave." Now, Mr. Worlow said, his voice sharp with panic. But it was too late. The ship groaned, a deep rumbling sound, like it was waking up from a long sleep. The walls shook, and the lights flickered out, leaving them in complete darkness. Panic spread like wildfire among the crew. A voice echoed through the ship. It wasn't the soft whisper anymore, it was loud, angry. "You shouldn't have come." The air felt thick, suffocating. The crew tried to move, but the hallways twisted around them, impossible to navigate. Doors opened and closed on their own, and shadows moved just out of reach. The black ship was alive, and it was not going to let them leave. Mr. Whirlow's mind raced. The stories. The curse. He had ignored it all. And now, it seemed, he was part of it. The crew was scattered now, each of them trying to find a way out. But the ship seemed to change, the walls closing in, trapping them. Alara was the first to scream. Her voice was swallowed by the darkness, and when Mr. Whirlow turned, she was gone. He called out, but there was no answer. Panic gripped him as he ran through the hallways, but no matter where he turned, he couldn't find the exit. The ship seemed endless. Finally, he found the control room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. The air was heavy with the presence of something ancient, something evil. Then, in the center of the room, a figure appeared. It was dressed in dark robes, its face hidden in shadow. But Mr. Whirlow knew what it was. The captain of the black ship. And now, it was claiming him too. The figure reached out, and Mr. Whirlow froze. He couldn't move. The ship's curse had claimed him. It had claimed them all. And just like that, the black ship drifted silently through space once again, its curse sealed, waiting for the next fool to answer its call. Captain Mr. Whirlow had always prided himself on staying calm in the face of danger. He had explored deep space, dealt with hostile alien forces, and survived situations that would make most men tremble. But as his ship, the Vanguard, floated through the black emptiness of space, something felt different. The air was heavy, and there was a chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. It started with a signal. A strange, low-frequency message came through the ship's communication system. It wasn't like anything Mr. Whirlow had ever heard. It was a whisper, a slow, chilling hum that made his skin crawl. The message was simple. Come closer, Captain Whirlow. Come to us. At first, Mr. Whirlow thought it was some kind of mistake or interference. But the message repeated over and over again, pulling him closer to an unknown part of space, a place no ship had ever traveled. His crew was uneasy. They had heard rumors of a ship, a dark, mysterious vessel that consumed the fear of anyone who came too close. But such tales were always dismissed as myths. Now, with the signal growing stronger, the myths didn't seem so far-fetched. Captain, his first officer, Alara, said softly, her voice full of worry. What if it's the ship that feeds on fear? Mr. Whirlow glanced at her, then back at the coordinates on the screen. There was no turning back. We have to see it for ourselves. As the Vanguard approached the coordinates, the stars seemed to fade. The blackness of space grew thicker, as if the universe itself was closing in around them. And then, through the darkness, they saw the ship. It was enormous, with a dark, metallic surface that seemed to shimmer and shift, as if it were alive. The shape of the ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. It looked like a twisted maze of metal, with no clear entrance or exit. The ship seemed to draw them in, its gravity pulling at the Vanguard like a predator stalking its prey. Captain, we need to leave, Alara said, fear creeping into her voice. But it was too late. The ship's pull was too strong. They were already locked in. With a sharp hiss, the airlock opened, and Mr. Whirlow and his crew stepped aboard the strange vessel. The moment they set foot inside, the temperature dropped. It was freezing, colder than space itself. But it wasn't just the cold that unnerved them. It was the feeling that something was watching, waiting. The halls of the ship stretched out before them, dark and silent. There were no lights, no sounds, just the cold, suffocating quiet. As they moved deeper into the ship, the walls seemed to shift and bend, making the layout impossible to navigate. No matter which way they turned, they found themselves in the same dark corridor, as though the ship was playing tricks on them. Something's not right, Alara whispered. It's like the ship knows our fears. Mr. Whirlow nodded. He could feel it too. The ship seemed to feed off their fear, growing stronger with every step they took. The walls groaned as if the ship itself was alive, breathing, feeding on their anxiety. And then they heard it. A low growl echoing through the ship. It was the sound of something massive moving, shifting in the dark. "Get ready," Mr. Warlow ordered, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. "Stay close." But the fear was spreading. The crew began to panic. Alara's breathing grew shallow, and her eyes darted around nervously. One of the crew members, a young man named Taurus, started to tremble. He looked as if he was seeing something just out of reach, something that made his heart race with terror. "Help me," Taurus cried, his voice high with fear. He spun around, but there was nothing behind him. He was shaking uncontrollably. Before Mr. Warlow could react, Taurus screamed. His body jerked, as if something invisible was dragging him away. He clawed at the air, his screams echoing through the ship until they suddenly stopped. Taurus was gone. The crew froze. The terror was real. And now they were trapped inside a ship that fed on it. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat only made them more vulnerable. "We need to leave. Now!" Mr. Warlow shouted, his voice shaking. But as they turned to find the exit, the walls shifted again, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. The ship was alive, and it was feeding. Another crew member, Roland, collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. I can't breathe. It's everywhere." His voice cracked as his body trembled. The fear was overwhelming. Mr. Warlow could feel it too. The ship was pulling at them, feeding off every ounce of their terror. They ran, but no matter how fast they moved, the corridors stretched on forever. It was as if the ship was toying with them, making sure they couldn't escape. Finally, Mr. Warlow reached the central control room, but there was no way out. The walls closed in, and the ship's whisper grew louder, drowning out everything else. "You will be ours. All of you." The last thing Mr. Warlow saw before everything went black was the monstrous shape of the ship, its dark surface gleaming with the fear of all who had ever entered. And then the Vanguard was gone, pulled into the darkness, its crew swallowed by the ship that ate fear. Captain Mr. Warlow had seen many things in his life, but nothing had ever terrified him like the message he had just received. His ship, the Vanguard, was on a routine journey through an empty sector of space when a strange signal appeared on his screen. It wasn't like any normal communication. There were no words, just a series of chilling images, one after the other. A dark figure. A shadowed face. A skull. And then a voice, soft and cold. "Come. The deal awaits." Mr. Warlow froze. He had heard stories of death itself, of deals made with the unknown, but he had always dismissed them as superstition. This, though, felt different. The message was clear and unsettling, and it stirred something deep inside him. The image of the skull was burned into his mind, and despite the logical part of his brain telling him to ignore it, curiosity pushed him forward. "Captain, we've found something," Elara, his first officer, said, her voice trembling with unease. "It's not a normal signal. Something's wrong." Warlow's grip tightened on the controls. He couldn't shake the feeling that the message was meant for him. A call. A challenge. Or perhaps a trap. But he had to know what it meant. He ordered his crew to follow the coordinates the signal had given them. As they approached the location, the stars around them seemed to blur, as if the universe itself was closing in. The blackness of space felt thicker, heavier. And then, ahead of them, something appeared, a dark, enormous ship. It was unlike any vessel they had ever seen. It had no lights, no markings, and it seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. It was as if the ship itself was alive, watching them. "Captain," Elara said again, her voice now filled with fear. "We shouldn't approach it. There's something off about it." But Mr. Warlow couldn't turn back. He set a course for the ship, unable to ignore the pull he felt. When they docked, the airlock opened with a soft hiss, revealing a cold, empty interior. The ship's walls were smooth and dark, with no windows or signs of life. It was deathly quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of their own ship's engines. As they moved further into the ship, the atmosphere became heavier, more oppressive. The crew's unease grew with each step. The ship felt wrong, like it was waiting for them. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the floor sent shivers down their spines. Mr. Warlow couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. And then they found it. A massive room at the heart of the ship. In the center of the room stood a figure tall, cloaked, and shrouded in darkness. Its face was hidden, but its presence was unmistakable. It was as if the very air around it was charged with something ancient and powerful. "You've come," the figure spoke, its voice low and cold, like the wind passing through a graveyard. "You seek the deal, Captain Warlow." Mr. Warlow's heart raced. He didn't know how the figure knew his name, but the words made his blood run cold. He had to ask, "What is this? What do you want from me?" The figure raised one hand, and with a sudden motion, the room seemed to come alive. Shadows twisted and danced, and the floor beneath their feet seemed to tremble. The figure's voice echoed in the room, filling the space with an overwhelming presence. "I offer you power, Captain," it said, "a power beyond your wildest dreams. A chance to control fate itself. But in return, you must pay the price." Mr. Warlow's mind raced. Power. Control. It was tempting, more tempting than anything he had ever imagined. But the warning in the figure's voice rang clear in his mind. A price. There was always a price. "What is the price?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure's hood shifted, revealing a face pale, hollow, and timeless. It was the face of death itself. Empty, endless eyes stared back at him. "Your soul," the figure said, its voice like a death rattle. "In exchange for power, you will give your soul to me. Your life will be mine when the time comes." A chill ran down Mr. Warlow's spine. He had never believed in such things, but now, standing in front of the embodiment of death, he couldn't deny it. The offer was real. And it was dangerous, but power control over his destiny. It was tempting. Too tempting. Alora's voice broke through his thoughts. "Captain, don't do it. We don't know what we're dealing with." Mr. Warlow turned to her, his mind torn. The price was high, but the rewards were endless. Could he refuse? The figure seemed to sense his hesitation. "You already know the truth, Captain. Power comes with a cost. Will you accept it, or will you walk away empty-handed?" For a moment, there was silence. Mr. Warlow's mind raced, weighing the choice. But in the end, his desire for power won out. "I accept your deal." The moment the words left his lips, the figure raised its hand again. A wave of darkness engulfed him, and for a brief second, he felt his very essence being torn away. When the darkness lifted, the ship was silent once more. The figure was gone, and the crew was left alone in the room. Mr. Warlow stood, feeling a strange power coursing through him. He had made the deal. He had accepted the price. But deep down, he knew that nothing could prepare him for the day when death would come to claim what was owed. Captain Mr. Warlow had always been drawn to the unknown. For years, he had explored the farthest reaches of space, following leads that others thought were nothing more than stories. But there was one mystery that had always haunted him. The mystery of the final secret. It was said to be hidden in the deepest, darkest corner of the galaxy, a secret so powerful that it could change the course of the universe. Many had tried to find it, but no one had ever returned. Some said the final secret was a myth, while others believed it was too dangerous to be uncovered. But to Mr. Warlow, it was an irresistible challenge. His ship, the Vanguard, was nearing the edge of space when they intercepted a strange signal. It wasn't like anything they had ever encountered. The signal was brief, fragmented, but the message was clear. The final secret is within reach. Come if you dare. The crew was hesitant. They had heard rumors of the final secret, of the ships that had vanished, and the explorers who had never returned. But Mr. Warlow couldn't turn back now. He had come this far. "We're going after it," he declared, his voice firm. "We've come too far to stop now." The crew followed his command, although fear had begun to creep into their minds. They followed the signal's coordinates, and as they moved deeper into the unknown, the stars began to fade. It was as if the universe itself was retreating, leaving them in a void. Then, they saw IT.I in the distance. A massive structure floated in the void, an ancient, crumbling space station. It looked as if it had been abandoned for centuries, yet something about it felt alive, pulsing with energy. The vanguard slowly approached the station, and as they docked, the airlock opened with a hiss. The crew stepped into the cold, empty station, the silence pressing down on them like a weight. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dark. There were no signs of life, but the atmosphere was thick with something that made Mr. Worlow's skin crawl. "We need to find out what's here," he said, his voice low and cautious. As they moved deeper into the station, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The walls seemed to shift, the lights flickering as if they were alive. Every creak of metal, every shadow seemed to move. The crew's unease turned into fear, but Mr. Worlow pressed on, determined to uncover the final secret. They reached the heart of the station, a massive chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly. At the center of the room stood a large, metallic door. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, covered in intricate patterns and symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. "This is it," Alara, his first officer, whispered. "The final secret is behind this door." Mr. Worlow approached the door cautiously, his heart pounding. He placed his hand on the cold surface, and the moment he did, the symbols on the door began to glow brighter. The air around them grew heavier, and a voice low, echoing, filled the room. "You have come far, Captain. But can you handle the truth?" The voice seemed to come from everywhere, echoing in their minds. Mr. Worlow's heart raced. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a room bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light. Inside, the room was a single massive object, an ancient, floating sphere. It pulsed with energy, and as they approached it, the sphere began to glow brighter, its light growing more intense. A strange feeling washed over them, a sense of awe and fear, as if they were standing on the edge of something enormous, something they couldn't fully comprehend. The voice spoke again. "This is the final secret. The knowledge of the universe. The power to reshape reality itself. But remember, Captain, with great knowledge comes great cost." Mr. Worlow stepped closer to the sphere, his mind racing. This was it, the power, the secret. But something about the warning in the voice made him hesitate. "What was the cost?" "Alara," he said, turning to his first officer, "do you feel that? Something's wrong. We shouldn't be here." But Alara's eyes were fixed on the sphere, her expression blank. "It's too late," she whispered. "The secret is too great to resist." Before Mr. Worlow could stop her, Alara reached out and touched the sphere. The moment her hand made contact, a blinding light engulfed the room. The crew shielded their eyes, but the light was too intense. When the light finally faded, the room was silent. Alara was gone. "Where is she?" Mr. Worlow demanded, but there was no answer. The sphere had absorbed her, just as the voice had warned. The voice spoke once more, its tone cold and final. "The final secret is not meant for mortals. Only those who are worthy may wield it." Alara was not. Mr. Worlow's heart sank. He had come for power, for knowledge, but the price was too high. He looked at the sphere, its glow dimming as it pulsed softly. It was beautiful, terrifying, and dangerous. The voice seemed to laugh. "Now, Captain, you must decide. Will you take the secret for yourself, or will you leave it behind? Choose wisely." Mr. Worlow stood there, torn. The power to reshape reality itself. The temptation was overwhelming. But as he thought of Alara, of the price she had paid, he knew what he had to do. With a heavy heart, he turned away from the sphere. "No," he said, his voice firm. "Some secrets are better left untouched." The station began to tremble, and the doors slammed shut behind him. The room grew darker, and the voice faded into silence. As Mr. Worlow and his crew fled, they knew one thing for certain: the final secret was not theirs to claim. As the station drifted back into the void, it waited, silent, for the next soul brave or foolish enough to seek it.